have it hidden far enough.
That's right.
That's it, the floor over there.
I feel like we need like your coffee talk. We should Marshall.
We should get some coffee. Well, I think it's 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and begin. Thank you all for coming. So Cindy and Karen are working with me on this, so we're going to kind of tag team through it. You know, today we're talking about building a research office, and there are, let's get rid of us. I don't want to see me, actually. Thank you. Yeah. There are many ways of doing this, and we certainly, I don't think any of us feel like we have the answer for everybody. Sometimes we don't even have the answer for ourselves, but it's an evolving process. I apologize here. People can see you. I do think we have a few folks who've called in from around the state, from the CCTS partners, so just I'm sure you want to do that. So we're going to just sort of give you an overview. We're going to know a lot of this. I mean, a lot of these are going to be topics, things we talk about that are going to be very familiar. So we're going to hope we can sort of contextualize everything and just share different models of offices. And we do want this to be interactive, so share with us what you're doing and if you're having problems and what those problems are. Will we have the answers? Probably not, but we can work on it together. I think we find that research is so complicated and something new is always happening that if we don't share and work things out together, we'll all fail. But it's in our working together that makes a difference. So we're going to talk about, again, building a research office and what not to forget. That's the most important thing. You build an office, you build a process, and then suddenly you realize there's something missing. Will we touch on everything? Maybe not. Let's see if I can apologize. I'm going to stay on this slide. Oh, there we go. Found it. So what we hope you will be able to take away from today's session is, you would be able to identify some key factors when building a research office. Various designs and structures, things that have worked for us, things that have not, and please ask questions. And also when you're doing this, I mean, again, asking questions as you go through it is important, and know what questions to ask. So in any research study, we've sort of fine-tuned, there are three major components that you have to think about no matter whether you're just the only coordinator at your site or if you have a major enterprise of 30 people. Cancer Center is probably one that has massive numbers of folks, probably more than most of us. But there are three major categories, pretty simple. You've got budgets and contracts, you've got regulatory and clinical. And you need to figure out a way to cover all of those, as you know. The next few slides sort of detail what's under each of those buckets. You'll notice there's always an et cetera at the bottom because we do not anticipate these weren't intended to be comprehensive, but just to give you an idea of what each of these buckets would include. Certainly your clinical trials agreements, your CIRB, making sure that's covered, any other approvals that are necessary, contracts that are necessary for conducting your studies, costs. Again, that goes into the budget aspect of your contract, per subject, startup costs, oversight costs. Again, sometimes you have one person doing this, sometimes it's a study coordinator. It just depends how your office is structured, but we'll get to that later. You've got the IRB bucket. You've got your regulatory bucket, which includes all your IRB approvals, the renewals, all of that, preparing and collecting any essential documents, which if you're doing a study under an IND, you've got essential documents you have to collect. If you're doing a study with a sponsor, a pharmaceutical sponsor, they've got documents they want. So that's what we consider under regulatory. Keeping those up to date, site responsibility log, report generation. Again, we can put all those under regulatory. So somebody's going to have to deal with all of these. Clinical, really this would be the piece that's pretty much interactive with patients, with subjects, whether it's recruiting, enrollment, following them, SAE reporting, anything that has sort of a very specific subject focus. Sometimes there's an overlap between regulatory and clinical, such as SAE reporting. Sometimes SAE reporting can be considered regulatory because it is a regulatory requirement that you submit those. But for purposes of knowing how they're evaluated and assessed, we keep them under clinical for right now. So how do you know? How do you build the best infrastructure you can? What do you have to think about? You need to think about the type of research being conducted. You need to think about, what are the needs of the investigator, leadership in the program, resources, strengths and weaknesses of the program, and vision for the program. Sometimes the consideration for the infrastructure is not unlike when you do a site assessment or site feasibility. What are all the things you have to consider? It's just that you're taking all the protocols and figuring out, to feasibly do all of these protocols, what do you have to have in place? What are you going to need? Are you a large office? Are you a small office? And how many people is it going to take? Always the hardest part. Are you ramping up? Are you going to hire people to come on board so that in 6 months, when you have 5 more protocols, you're capable of moving forward? So we're going to kind of talk through some scenarios. Certainly the most common one, I think that many of us, especially many have experienced. I can't say many in this room, but I know there are some. I know Sharon's experienced this. You're the only coordinator. You're the person in the office. You've got a PI, and then it's you. And you're going to do the budget, clinical, and the regulatory. Is that possible? It is possible, especially if you have a PI who only does a couple protocols. But as things grow, it becomes very difficult for one person to do all 3 buckets. But it can be done. And I know many of us, how many of you ever experienced that and had to be the sole person? Yeah. Sometimes I think these are the folks, they learn a lot. You learn all the things you don't want to know, actually, and all the things you don't want to do. But it is certainly a good way to understand the full scope of what it takes to conduct a clinical study. A second scenario, you might have one PI or an administrator, and you have so many studies. You have one person to do the budget. We have one person to do the clinical and one person to do the regulatory, or some combination thereof. I know this is all pretty simplistic, but it is just another way of looking at how we put together an office. This is another one where you might have one PI who is doing many studies, even more than the prior PI. So now we've got many coordinators, and and I think this is one, in some sense, it's similar to what they do in the cancer center, in that they match, you've got your nurse coordinator and a data manager who work together. So you've got 2 people then overseeing the clinical, and every step of the way. So you've got many folks working on the study, and you still have maybe one financial administrator, and maybe one regulatory administrator, or several. Again, it depends on the volume. And again, these folks would just be under the administrator rather than under the study coordinator, possibly. So, Cindy, do you want to kind of walk through this one? Because it's sort of...
So this one is a 4th scenario. This one, kind of the scenario that we have in our area and Penny has in her area. You know a little bit here too. But you've got a research program or this infrastructure that really the person that's overseeing the program itself is this research administrator or program director. And then under that director, they've got a financial officer, administrator who handles your budgets, contracts, regulatory person, and then research coordinator. So you can have a mix of nurses and non-nurses. But what's different about this is you kind of have these principal investigators in a pool. So you might be providing these services, per se, for maybe 10, 12, 15 different investigators or more. So the investigators still have the oversight of your study, but a lot of the day-to-day management, the oversight of staff, falls within this research administrator. And so this is definitely more of a program or an infrastructure that you would use in a large division or department, or more of a, like a fee-for-service, like a service center, fee-for-service kind of area where you might have all your investigators that might not be in the same type of disease realm. So you might have a variety of studies. And then Karen is going to walk through kind of how her setup is in her area.
So our area, we have a clinical trials unit. Our area is sort of a combination of scenario 3 and 4. We have multiple investigators, and then I'm the manager that oversees the different areas within our clinic. And the nice thing is we're all in the same building, and we're where our clinic disease patients are seen. So we have a vaccine unit. We run vaccine trials and microbicide trials, which are healthy volunteer studies in one area. And then we have 1917 research, which is HIV therapeutic trials, and now hepatitis C therapeutic trials. We have, and at this clinic, we have clinical trials, which really mostly is what we do. There's also some observational studies. We may have some studies, and just to back up, we have probably at any time about 30 to 40 ongoing trials. Some following patients, some not. Some have 50 patients, some may have 5. And I'll describe our unit in just a second. Retrospective database chart review studies, those are actually outside of our realm now. We have a different research group that does those. Most of our studies fall under the NIH or National Institute of Health, but we also do industry trials. And these are different, and I know most of y'all have done NIH and maybe industry trials as well, but we don't divide into this group does NIH, this group does industry. Everybody knows how to do all of the studies. Our regulatory office, in fact, does all the local IRB and work, so everybody knows how to do all the trials. And the types of studies we do, this just as a show some of our different variety. Treatment naive studies. So we see a lot of patients who are starting HIV treatment for the first time. So not only do our nurses or research staff have to understand how to do research, they really have to understand how to take care of patients with HIV, or at least understand. And we work as a team with the clinic. We see patients who are treatment experienced. We do studies of side effects of the drugs. Again, that means that the research staff has to be aware of what types of AEs to expect, communicate these to the PIs, who are also our doctors there. Deep salvage studies for people who are really out of options, and these patients could be really sick. And then we used to have more expanded access protocols to give people drugs until new drugs were available. But right now, HIV treatment has expanded beyond even my expectations. There are so many drugs available. Most of the patients are doing really quite well now. So now to kind of go over our team. Again, it's more like the scenario 3, scenario 4. We're very similar to the cancer center that Penny described. We have a few, really 2 main PIs and then some sub investigators. I'm the research manager, and we have an IRB regulatory associate, and she has an assistant now since we've grown so much. And then we have research RNs and data managers. And again, if you think back at that scenario number 3, our research nurse and data managers work as a team on a protocol. And I'll kind of talk about how they do that. A data entry operator, this person primarily, we have some outside labs that we key into the impact system now. That person's responsible for doing some data entry and also providing some administrative support. We have our own lab processing group in our building. They do all of our, for our studies, all the packaging, processing, any processing that has to be done, packaging and shipping, they handle that for us. So the way we work it, a protocol sponsor comes to one of our PIs, wants to do a study. They get with me, we look at, do we have capacity, the staffing to do the study? Do we have the patients to do the study? And I take it from there. If we say yes, we do. I do the feasibility questionnaire with the PI, and I pretty much from then take it to my team, and we get the study started. Regulatory specialists, we have a regulatory specialist coordinates all the IRB activities. Then the research nurse, again, their responsibilities, Penny already alluded to. Once we start the study, they're going to be the ones that select, screen, and enter the patients in the study. They do all the protocol-specific visits. They follow up on lab results, adverse events, charting, reporting, communicating things to the PI, or if it's a patient with a disease process, that person's physician. They do all of basically filling out the source document during the study procedures. Then the data manager, from that point, they do the case report forms. So you know the sponsor gives you these case report forms to complete. One reason we like to use the data managers is it's efficient for us because as a team, the data manager can kind of double check. They know the protocol like the nurse does. They can double check behind the nurse, look to see if anything, if they're filling out that case report form, did they miss any procedures? It's sort of a QC check, verifying the information. On top of the data manager, beyond that, I didn't mention, but we also have a person who is in charge of all of our quality assurance. Our sponsor requires that we have a quality assurance specialist, and even if it wasn't required, we still do it. They basically act like a monitor and make sure that we're ready for monitor visits at any given time. And the data entry operator, we have done away with the data entry operator because at one time we had a study that required the data managers to fill out paper forms, and then the data entry operator would take the paper forms, enter those into the electronic database that the sponsor provided. We have done away with that middle paper form now, so the data managers actually do the direct data entry for us. We have a system of, when the sponsors give you queries, those types of things, we have somebody that goes behind to make sure all the queries are answered. And I already mentioned that lab tech processes and ships the lab specimens. I can't stress enough about communication. We're all in the same building. We communicate on a daily basis. But the team approach we have is we have quality assurance meetings or staff meetings. It used to be once a week, sometimes bi-weekly. But when we have these meetings, we always discuss this is a good time to talk about any adverse events or adverse events that need to be followed up on with the PI, talk about abnormal lab questions, any problems with study accrual, what do we need to do to beef up accrual, those types of things, any retention issues if we have people that are missing visits, and then follow up on problems that we may have discussed at the previous meeting. So it's really, really a great way to communicate. We would communicate on an ongoing basis with the PI, but then when we get together once a week, we do minutes, then we can refer back to that. And it shows the sponsor, we are in communication, the PI is involved. So I guess quality, you want to go over quality?
So we just wanted to highlight kind of the qualities that you would have to have or you need to focus on when you're having successful or building a successful infrastructure. And a lot of it you probably know, but there are important things to consider. One, you need to think about efficiency and how to create efficiency in your program. Standardization, sometimes people don't like that word, but it creates efficiency, especially when you're building an infrastructure. Diversification of research funding. So Karen talked about having a mix of NIH and industry. If you can find that mix, sometimes it offers some stability in the program. And it doesn't necessarily have to be NIH and industry. Maybe it's nonprofit and industry or nonprofit and NIH. A combination of funding. Having the ability to change and adjust to change. So that is where kind of this leading through change and managing change, it's really critical because as much as research changes and people change, you need to be able to adjust all the changes that are happening and then make that kind of understood and welcomed among the staff.
And I sometimes think if you can't accept change or work with change, you shouldn't be in research.
Don't be in research.
It's just, there's just no way. After 20 years, it's never two days are never the same, and you're always faced with new challenges. So.
Involvement of investigators and staff. However you can get your staff involved, get the investigators involved, it doesn't, one way isn't the best. And you're going to have to tailor your ways of communication with your investigators. One investigator might like weekly meetings, another one might like bi-weekly or emails. Whatever works for your group, you have to be able to kind of do a needs assessment on your group and see what it is that will work. Really kind of recognize the needs. So what is it that you need to keep the infrastructure moving forward? What is it that will make it successful? What positions do you need to add, change, those types of things. Established mission and goals, I think this is sometimes overlooked, but if you know what the mission of your research program is going to be and what your goals are and communicating that, it can be beneficial. Communication. We said it several times through the presentation that you have to communicate different ways, just communicate. And it's easy to say, but finding a way that works for your group. Staff is critical. Really good staff, experienced staff, staff that is motivated to work, driven, invested in the program. And that goes along with staff satisfaction, knowing what your staff is what they need, what, keeps them going, and checking in with them on a regular basis to see how you can keep them happy with the job, what they need for support, those types of things. The team environment Karen talked about, it's critical to the success of the research studies, but also to the success of your program. Collaboration, so you're collaborating within your group, but also looking at who else you can work with, either on campus or outside of campus, that can help you and your program and make things better. Karen, that's how Karen and I met, actually. Our areas collaborated on SB studies. And so I was in GI, she was in infectious disease, and so our groups came together, and really it was beneficial for both our divisions. Education and training, offering that to staff, faculty, whatever they need to keep them satisfied, keep them motivated, and keep them trained and up to date on things. It goes into trained staff. Experience, and not to say you have to be an experienced coordinator, but it's good to have a nice mix of experience and new. So having new people and people that are new to research can really bring this surge of energy and excitement, and it kind of is a nice mix. Having resources, and sometimes when we get into funding issues, it's hard, but looking at what your resources are within the infrastructure you have, your area, your department, but what also is available on campus or through other organizations, research organizations that you can participate in. And support. And kind of the support comes from leadership. So what is there to make your program successful from the point of not just maybe administration within campus, but your division, your department, your investigators, what they're offering you to be successful.
Before we leave this slide, what is the biggest challenge here for you all, would you say? Well, what's the hardest part about having a good infrastructure? Any thoughts?
In our area, it's communication.
That's one of our big problems.
I think the one thing, I'm glad it's on there is staff satisfaction. And,
That's so important.
talking to your staff and making sure everybody's getting what they need. Everybody has different needs. And again, keeping your staff engaged is so important. That's the only, because you have to work as a team, and I guess that kind of goes into the team.
And to add to that, when you have a variety of studies, I try to, as much as possible, it's not always possible depending on what type of studies you have going on, is to give a nurse the option of, are you interested in doing this study? Is this something you'd like to do? And I have one nurse that loves doing the treatment naive studies. He likes to build that rapport with a new patient. Another nurse likes to work with hepatitis C, so she does that. So that helps with the staff satisfaction. And I also didn't mention that if you, especially with healthy volunteer trials, we also have a recruiter. And it can be a really good bang for your buck if you have a really difficult population you're looking for, and to have a recruiter as part of the team, rather than nurses on the phone all the time trying to recruit.
We talked about communications. One thing that we've done just in the past several months is we actually have probably 20-some investigators, and they're in different specialty areas. So every week, sometimes every other week, we send the investigators an email, all of them, that gives them an update on where their studies are in the process, and it gives them a full update on their screening and enrollment. It's an email. Sometimes they look at it, sometimes they don't. But a lot of times they'll take it and they'll print it out and take it to one of the meetings that we're going to. And they'll discuss it with their other sub-investigators. So it's worked. Because we have so many investigators, setting up regular meetings is hard. We're lucky a lot of times to get a monthly meeting with them. But that regular email gives them a lot of information.
Are all investigators on the same sheet?
No, we break it up.
Okay, because I was thinking the competitiveness of.
So we break it up, like interventional cardiology gets an update, EPs.
But there might be different investigators.
There's
on
different
that,
investigators.
So you're still getting that.
Mm-hmm. But those investigators seem to always work together.
So they're the team.
One is the PI, they're all the sub-I.
Yeah.
And so sharing that information with them works.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I think the one other thing, I like the diversification of research funding. I mean, we have gotten ourselves into a pickle just by having one source of funding. That's a bad thing. You really need to keep your funding come from different sources.
And that kind of leads into staff satisfaction a
The
little bit,
diversity,
because
yeah.
they feel like there's some stability.
Mhm.
You know, whenever you're 100% funded on something, like when you get to those last 6 months or that last year, I think sometimes people question, but if you can diversify, it helps.
And getting clear expectations, like know what your enrollment goals are, and build, have a plan in place, and if you're not meeting those, get together. Staff need to kind of understand what your expectations are for the study.
Having goals sometimes is a motivator. You know, we all like to have something, a target. And if you say you want 10 subjects per month, I think that's a motivator too. And then people then you can feel satisfied when you've got it. Like you're really miserable when you don't. We try and make it realistic.
Yeah, when you have a failing study and there's a nurse that, for whatever reason, happens to get those failing studies all the time, it's very frustrating. So you want to try to give a mix of good and easy to enroll.
We have a nurse who keeps shutting studies down before they get started. She gets assigned a study and then it shuts down.
Oh.
Nothing she's done, just kind of work. Do you all, so when our infrastructure, did you all see yourselves in there? Do you see anything that you would consider that might be different?
I think the other thing that is really important is if you're looking at creating an infrastructure, do an org chart. So those examples that we had, it can really clarify expectations. It can, and if you're thinking of kind of where you fall, it can help you decide where responsibilities and tasks need to be handled and managed. So if you start to grow, that org chart can help you.
One of the challenges, I think, is if you think about the org chart and change, because what I find in the CASG office is that everybody has certain tasks, but because of the nature of research, something new will happen this week, and then, something will be different next week. Just one or two little tasks, and then somebody has to be assigned those that didn't have them before. And that's, again, it's a bit of a challenge for the staff. A lot of people don't like to have their routine disrupted very much, but again, trying to set the tone that it's going to happen, and it's a one-time deal. I mean, I don't know if you all have faced that, but again, if you have defined jobs, then you say, okay, there are times we're going to work together.
It's where in your job description you have
And other. What are the biggest challenges you all have in your offices? What do you struggle with the most?
Not having enough of me.
Because Sharon, you're that solo coordinator, aren't you? You do just about everything.
I do have a research specialist that helps, but it's tough trying to coordinate several studies and, keep up with everything, and then,
I'm expecting you all to talk more.
That's
okay.
Well, this is what you need to ask yourself. So that kind of goes back into doing a needs assessment. That's what I call it.
Yeah.
But you should kind of do it on an annual basis. Every year, look at how many investigators you have, what the studies are, what your staffing is, what some of the challenges were for the year, how much money do you have, and that can be in funding. That can be one of your first questions sometimes. But then what are your expectations for growth? So that's really sitting down with your PI or your administrator or your director and asking them, what's the plan for the next couple of years? Where's the program going to go? Or what are our goals for the next 3 to 5 years? Taking on different studies, new studies, and having this conversation.
What?
Y'all have an extra 30 minutes.
Can you identify what the biggest problem is with setting up a research office? Is it really just getting the resources, do you think?
Resources, finding the balance. keeping everybody happy, you know, and challenged, you know, you don't want somebody to get bored in what they're doing. But you also want them to have enough support.
I think funding, if you're gonna create something new, you need that funding, and you need to convince leadership that, you know, at least 2 years of funding to get you started, so that you can have the time to build your trials and build, have recruitment and build enrollment so that you can be successful. Because otherwise you kind of back into it, and that you want to build it right from the beginning. I think you really need to convince them how important it is for an investment up front, which is hard, but
Have been other resources on campus that have done it. Ask questions, what's worked, what hasn't.
yeah, in our area, if we talked about the org chart changing, our org chart changes like every 6 months. But you either add staff or staff leads, or when you do have staff leads, I think you take it as an opportunity to look at if you need to change anything or shift responsibilities or make it a different position and see, use it as an opportunity.
When you talk about funding, one thing that happened in our unit is we had the vaccine unit. We went into our re-competition. We had a 7-year grant, went into the next 7-year competition, and our vaccine unit did not get funded. Well, for 2 months they thought they didn't get funded. We were eventually funded, but during that time, they had always sort of been in their own silo and worked, you know, their staff did vaccine trials. Well, to keep people's jobs, we started cross-training into some of our HIV studies, and so they could keep their jobs. And now we're doing that quite a bit, and it's working, and it's actually been kind of good for all of us, because the vaccines, you know, our mission ultimately is to stop the end of AIDS. We just had a summit the other day, but to know what I guess what vaccine studies are out there for those of us that take care of the treatment trials for HIV positive patients. So we have that big mission of really taking care of stopping HIV and treating HIV and keeping everybody funded, which is their only thing. Cross-training can be good. Ultimately, why you guys did that, your clinical trial unit, so to speak, at the service center.
So we have 5 different specialty areas that all kind of used to run their own research, and we combined them into one. So we still have coordinators that are specialized in some of those areas, but everybody cross-trained. And that was kind of a challenge in the beginning to get not just the coordinators, but the faculty to understand the benefits of cross-training. But once they started to do it, they realized they have more staff available, the faculty did. And the coordinators realized, well, I always have kind of a backup now. And they got to learn something new. And then reaching out, like, if you're the only one doing a study, reaching out to other areas on campus that you might have some collaborations with, like Karen and I did. We just happen to be involved in some of the same studies. We've never worked together before, but it kept both our groups financially stable for a while. And a lot of the collaboration fell on us. We worked out a system. If the study came in, who needed the coordinator support? Was it somebody over in Karen's area, or was it somebody over in my area? And we worked that process out, and it was very good.
And one of our investigators worked with your coordinators when the other investigators weren't really interested in that particular study.
There's ways to reach out across campus.
Thank you all for coming. We will see you in 2 weeks, and we have nothing next Thursday, except for the research seminar in the morning. Do you have any research orientation?
For new
Program.
research.
Oh, is that on Thursday? Next Thursday, yeah, 8 to 12. And so let us know if you want to register. I don't remember.
Something I'm trying for next month.
We'll let you know.
We'll let you know.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Do you know we want to remove one of our studies because we the price, that's where hepatitis C genotype approved by the FDA in the country. They're using it a light of it in another country. And whether or not through it. We want to use their central iron. There's the guidelines, federal guidelines that will keep these devices. I can see the device a lot of, but we have that we're using already in clinic that's FDA.
So it's considered a device under FDA, but they would have.
Yeah, but we are doing a study on the device system, and it's not under an ID. I mean, it was exempt totally from that. We got, there's a, I can send you the information.
I kind of took John, how did you get it?
We sent them explanation why. I mean, again, I have a, there are, in the regulations, it says if your study meets these, you don't need to do it. Yeah, send it,
And then I can show it to Jonathan, Jonathan,